Good morning, Lighthouse. This morning's proverb is a word for anyone who's ever been a pretender, been a faker, who has decided that the outside that you want is to be a wise, godly life, but the inside of you hasn't caught up, which is really the exact opposite of how the kingdom of God is supposed to work. We're supposed to be transformed from the inside out. I wonder if we could even just reflect on some of the passages that are most familiar to us that would lead us to understand that. Paul saying it's no longer me that lives, but Christ lives in me. The idea that Christ is supposed to be formed in us. The Christian life is not the beginning. The rules of the Christian life are not what come first. What comes first is our heart. And so in chapter 3, which we're only going to do 4 verses today, so we can save verse 5, which is maybe the most familiar verse in all of the Proverbs. We'll save that for next time. But verse 1 of chapter 3 says, "My son, do not forget my teaching, but let your heart keep my commandments." And you think this is a familiar way to start a section. Solomon before has said, "My son, keep my commandments." But remember, one time it's been about your ear. Don't let your ear forget. Incline your ear towards wisdom. And another time it's been more about your, verse 2 started with, "My son, if you receive my words and treasure up my commandments." So it's been about the pursuit of our life. So incline your ear, listen, and then have our life be pursuing. But now he's getting straight, pardon the pun, straight to the heart of the matter. And he says, "My son, do not forget my teaching, but let your heart keep my commandments." Assuming that the commandments of Solomon were the commandments of God. Let your heart keep commandments. Not just your body, not just your mind, not just your actions, but your heart, that core of you, that word that gets translated heart, sometimes it gets translated mind. It means your inner person. Do you remember Paul praying for his friend, saying, "Man, I pray that you'd be transformed in your inner man, in your inner self, in your inner person, the real, actual you." And if there is a struggle between the real you, the you that nobody sees, the most internal part of you, and your actions, if you are trying to keep up a facade of godliness, but the inside of you just isn't there, could I just encourage you? Could I, beg you? Could I implore you to not spend your time simply trying to look like a Christian, but rather spend your time praying that Christ would be formed in you? Spend your time thinking about, meditating on the true nature of your heart. What is really going on in there? Solomon says, look, wisdom starts with fear of the Lord, and we find it as we pursue it like silver, and there's these benefits that come. We're going to be protected from evil. We got to clear out the din of the world. We got to clear out the temptation of the world, clear out our enemy's voice as well. But then we really have to examine our own hearts and say, what do I actually want? What kind of person actually am I? Am I somebody who has a heart full of bitterness, a heart full of anger, a heart full of sin, and yet I'm doing my best to keep a facade of godliness going? That's just not enough. That's not the wise life. In fact, that's a life that'll tear you apart. So Solomon says, "My son, do not forget my teaching, but let your heart keep my commandments." Not just your body, not just your actions, but your heart. "For length of days and years of life and peace will they add to you." Again, these are proverbs, not promises. It's not that if you get this right, you'll necessarily live a longer life. But man, you see what he's talking about. It will wreck you from the inside out if you're trying to be two people. If your heart is full of bitterness and fear and judgment and anger and unforgiveness and rage and self-righteousness, but you're trying to keep the facade of a wise person, man, that's going to tear you apart from the inside out. We just can't live happily that way. It's going to take years off your life. You'll see it in your face. You'll see it in everything about yourself. And then I love the end of that. It says, if your heart will be wise, if you'll let your heart keep God's commands, the length of your days, it'll add length of your days and years to life, and peace it will add to you. Man, I don't know about you, but peace is hard fought for me. I want to be not just a man who's at peace with my fellow man. I want to be a man who's at peace with himself. I want to not be at war with my actions and my heart, but I don't want a heart that's full of bitterness while I'm trying to keep up the facade of a godly person. I want for godliness, righteousness, holiness. I want it to start my relationship with God to start in my heart, not in my behavior. And I want out of the overflow of that sweetness, out of the overflow of that love that I have for God and that God has for me, that's how I want my behavior to be transformed. Let not steadfast love and faithfulness forsake you. Steadfast love and faithfulness are how the psalmist characterizes God. And let's not have it be lost on us that David was Solomon's dad. Solomon had grown up hearing that this is what characterized the very nature of God, that steadfast, enduring love. You can't find steadfast love anyplace else. There is no other enduring love. And, I love my family a lot, and I have a wonderful wife who loves me, but whether it's by illness or death or whatever, that is not an everlasting love. The only everlasting love is the love that God has for you. And God is the only faithful one. So he says, look, this is the characteristic of God. This is what God's like. And he says, let not steadfast love and faithfulness forsake you. Bind them around your neck with them. Write them on the tablet of your heart. So he's saying, this is what your life needs to be about. You want to know what it means to live a wise life? Is how God is faithful, God is love, God is the one who endures. You need to reflect that love to the world. Do you see how this is not a legalistic do this, do this, do this, do this, do this? This is rather, do you know how in every situation God's love is consistent? You know how there's nothing you can do to outrun him? You know how God's faithfulness has never let you down? You know how God is the same all the time? Be like that. So you will find favor and good success in the sight of God and man. Man, are your heart and your actions lined up? What is reflecting to the world? Is there a facade of faithfulness that's reflecting to the world? Is there the veneer of righteousness that's reflecting to the world, but really the inside of your heart is far from God? Man, if we're going to live wise lives, the next verse that we'll talk about next time is trust in the Lord with all your heart. That trusting has to begin with a transformed heart. Solomon's advice is this: have it begin with fear of the Lord. Seek wisdom everywhere with everything you've got. Be sure to not listen to the din of the crowd, and be sure to block out the enemy's voice. And as you grow in wisdom, don't just grow in the outside, Christian-y look, but rather have your heart be transformed by God so that you reflect his nature to the world. And make it the most intimate thing to you. Bind it around your neck. Write it on the tablet of your heart. That the commands of God not only are the things that you're trying to follow, but they describe and define who you are. Have a great day, Lighthouse.